Hi, everyone. This is Achyuta Bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to talk about planetary ingresses. In particular, we're looking at Jupiter, who is about to change signs, Saturn, that just changed signs. And we've talked a lot about Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, the Great Conjunction, what all of it means. But it's also a really good moment to talk about planetary ingresses and what it means when planets change signs generally. This is also a good opportunity to talk about what it means when a planet changes signs and changes dignities. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. In the meantime, I want to remind you all that I am fundraising for the last 40 days of the calendar year. During this time, I go into a period during my daily spiritual practice of concentration on the lessons learned in the previous year and, just what kinds of insights I might have had over the past year, how I've grown, and maybe things that I want to work on in the year ahead and things like that. During this time, I fundraise and try to raise all the support that I can from all of you to support this channel in the year ahead. So right now we are at 771 backers. Our stretch goal this year is 1,000. We have 15 days left to go. When you donate, you can pick up discounted tuition to my programs. It's half off to my year one, my year two class, my horary class. There are readings and all different kinds of rewards that you can pick up when you donate. So I appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Let's see what we can do with 15 days left to go. You can find the link to donate in the comment section below and in the description of this video. Okay, so planetary ingresses. What are they, and what is important to know about them? How do they work? And then we'll talk a little bit about Jupiter and Saturn again. So I'm going to put up the real-time clock so that you can see the chart that I'm looking at. And we'll give a few different examples. So here we go. What you have noticed just last night, Saturn ingressed into Aquarius to stay. Goodbye, Capricorn. It was nice knowing you, nice hanging out with you. Then in the next couple of days, Jupiter is going to change and move into Aquarius as well. Now you'll notice that there's some other planetary ingresses that are about to take place. You can notice that the Sun and Mercury, for example, are about to change signs and enter Capricorn. You can notice in not too long, it's a little bit slower moving planet, but you'll notice that Mars is also going to change signs into Taurus eventually. Here it's at the 21st degree. Every sign has 30 degrees. Every degree has a total of 60 minutes. And those are ways of, it's a sort of a sexagesimal division that we use in astrology. And when a planet changes signs in ancient astrology, because whole sign houses were one of the predominant forms of house division, if not the predominant form, you will notice that when a planet changes signs, it changes whole sign houses. And this is really, really important, both for tracking transits and in terms of things that are happening in your birth chart. So when you were born, planets may have been just about to change signs. I'm going to give you an example of this in a minute. Taking a look at planetary ingresses in general, let's talk about that first, and we'll talk a little bit about Jupiter and Saturn changing signs. Again, when a planet changes signs, it changes houses. And when you're tracking that as a transit or a forecasting technique, the really important thing to note is that what this means is that a new set of topics is going to become activated. Everything relates back to your birth chart. And so understanding which areas of your birth chart are being activated at any given time is part of why we look at transits. In a sense, we're plugging the moving planets of the sky back into your birth chart and saying, this is where they're traveling in the sky. This is how it correlates to in your birth chart. And especially when those transiting planets make connections, what are called aspects to the planets in your birth chart, they're like activated or turned on. And that means that that dimension of your natal karma or natal promise, it's sometimes called, will be released. You'll start to see that manifest. It's sort of like I use the image sometimes of a garden. And at certain times in a garden, if you have a lot of different things planted for different seasons, you're always going to get some color at different times of year. You know, some of the gardening magazines that my wife likes, she's an herbalist. They will talk about how to basically, if you're someone who wants to create, a beautiful aesthetic in your yard, you have to know what to plant so that you're getting different things coming in bloom at different times. And that way your yard always has some color. Your chart's a little bit like that too, in the sense that your karma doesn't all show up at once. Your karma is not something that's happening 24/7. There's going to be different time periods in life when the natal karma blossoms and shows itself or is activated. And so transits are the way that we track that activation, like the weather telling you, well, now this type of karma is going to bloom or blossom. Some karma happens over and over and over. Some blossoms really quick, like fireworks, and does not appear all the time. It's a little bit more special for it to show up. And some karma is also in the process of changing in this lifetime. So you're going to see some results in one area at one point in life, and then very different results in one area of life at a different time. So the way that we can tell that is often by virtue of the signs. For example, mutable signs tend to indicate karma that is very changeable in the lifetime, that may shift a lot or move around. Fixed signs or solid signs, oftentimes the karma is going to be more enduring or repetitive or solid and unchanging. And cardinal signs are like the fireworks that come up. It's when they do, they're very pivotal and dynamic, but they're not happening all the time. So, and it's not an exact science. These are just little clues that we have to give us a sense of what kind of karma is going to be taking place. We have been, for example, in the past since December of 2017, if you go back to the end of last year with Jupiter and Saturn, we've had planets in a cardinal sign, or what was called a tropical sign from the word tropos, which means to turn. So we've had a lot of very pivotal, dynamic, the dynamic energy of a cardinal, slow-moving cardinal planet can give you a longer time period where there's a lot of really dynamic, life-changing things happening that feel sometimes a little bit more shocking, or like fireworks going off is the metaphor that I like to use. When you have things moving into a fixed sign, as they are now, you're going to see themes that are more enduring, areas of your life that are less changeable or that are more deeply set in, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, will start to establish themselves. It can also mean that new things that are coming in are going to be slower to develop and will endure for a longer period of time. So those are important things to notice, and that's all a part of why we pay so much attention to planetary ingresses. Faster moving planets are moving through the zodiac a lot quicker, and sometimes these more minute details aren't as important to track because, it's like maybe at the bottom of your list of things that you're concerned about when Venus is going to last like a month in a sign or something. So, but when you have slow moving planets changing signs, that's when you really want to pay attention to those ingresses, because their impact is greater and longer, regardless of if they're landing in a cardinal, fixed, or mutable sign. So we do have two planets moving into a fixed sign, which suggests that we're moving from a period of real dynamism into things that are going to get more established. They're going to take longer time to develop. They'll last longer. They may also point to things that are harder to change, or things that are more deeply entrenched that are being challenged in some ways. And also remember, the focus has been in Capricorn. Look at the whole sign house of Capricorn in your birth chart. Where is that, and what has the focus been? Now think to yourself, that focus with Jupiter and Saturn changing signs into Aquarius is going to shift topically. So let me give you some examples. Let's take a look at this chart, and I'm going to switch this around a little bit. So let's just say that you have had the energy of Capricorn in your 9th house for the past few years. This is my own rising sign, Taurus, on the ascendant, so I'm using it because it's very familiar to me. There's been a lot of focus on the area of religion, higher education, spirituality, mysticism, foreign countries. Well, if you look at, in my chart, right, if I look back and I say, well, what's been going on since December of 2017, and more specifically since December of last year when Jupiter entered that sign, or even dating all the way back to, you could even go back to like 2000 and what was it, 9 or something, that Pluto entered Capricorn. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. You can say, how has there been a focus on the 9th house? Well, I'll just do recently, since 2017, when I started studying with a guru in the Bhakti yoga tradition. So there's been a lot of focus on my 9th house. Now, that focus last year, also receiving my spiritual name initiation from my spiritual teacher, Okay, so there's so much focus on the ninth house, and also working through past issues around religion and spirituality as a kind of healing journey. That's been a big part of the past few years for me as well. I was sort of averse to some of the things that ended up becoming really important to me. And so there was a level of I guess you could say, healing that was a part of that. At any rate, now Jupiter and Saturn are moving into the 10th. And so just as they move in, especially sometimes within the week or two that they move in, they'll make a real splash. You look at the focus changing to the topical area of the whole sign house of Aquarius, which, if you're a Taurus rising, would be the 10th. What is the 10th? Vocation, activities in the world or society that you were born into, the kind of job or career that you have, potentially things like notoriety or success or recognition, right? So all of a sudden you have focus being put onto that area, into that area. It doesn't mean that, the ninth house won't be a part of my life. Last time I checked, I'm an astrologer, and a yogi and all of that good stuff. So, the focus, though, is going to shift a lot more into developments in my professional life. And so that would be the case for anyone who was an Aquarius rising, that you're going to see that shift from ninth to 10th house. Now, it's not as simple as just saying, well, that's the shift. That's where it's heading. You have to understand, what does your natal chart say about the 10th house? How do you read if the 10th house is being activated in your natal chart? Even though these planets in Aquarius right now have their own significations, they aren't going to take you outside of the realm of what your natal chart says about what that area of life should be like, or what kinds of things are likely to occur. And so you have to understand that context and bring it in. That's part of what an astrologer does when they read your chart. At any rate, you can watch for this transition in your chart and track it. And it's a very good way of getting the most out of a transit. People always ask me, how do you get the most out of a transit? And the number one thing is understand what area of life it's affecting or highlighting. And notice, especially with big transitions like this, notice where it was and to where it's going. If you track that much of the storyline, you're ahead of a lot of where most people are at, where they're just saying what's going to happen. When you become engaged actively in tracking the transit and saying, here it was over here, but it's now going over there, that awareness is going to give you a lot of insight. So, and if you can track that in your natal chart, if you have the ability to read your natal chart as well, that's going to be great. Now let's just give another example. So let's say that the energy has been entirely focused on the 7th place, marriage, relationships, social standing in the world, and so forth. But now things are moving into the 8th house. The Jupiter-Saturn dynamic will move into the 8th. Well, then now topically you're going to move into things like potentially some heavier topics, right? Like death or loss, or sort of the 8th house is like the karmic bills that are due. So that can be a part of it. On the other hand, you're going to go into questions about, say, your spouse's income or finances, or their changes perhaps around their money or their financial standing, because this house is associated with the spouse or partner's money or wealth. You could also get into questions about other people's opinions of you. This house was associated with the esteem of other people, which is partly the value that they place on you. And so there may be questions about where you stand or where you fit in or don't socially. Lots of other things, right? But you get the feeling. Now, you want to do this for not just where it's going, but where it's been compared to where it's going, because there can be connective tissue there as well. So, for example, one thing that I find really interesting, this is my wife's a Cancer rising. So there's been a lot of focus on social standing over the past few years in her life, as she decided to close our yoga studio back in Maryland and focus a little bit more on herbalism and on being a mom, because she was kind of wearing a bunch of hats: mom, herbalist, yoga studio owner. And she decided to narrow and limit that range of activities. Now we're in a new place in Minnesota, new social dynamic to explore, new roles to take on, and new ways of finding out where I fit in or where I don't fit in, and all of those kinds of questions that can become an issue, of course, and a good one, right? Not a bad one necessarily. Now, of course, one thing that's happened in this also is that, because the yoga studio is closed now. The transit I've also sort of transitioned into being sort of more of the one who supports our business. And that's fine. Like, we've traded off throughout our marriage together. Like, earlier in our career, it was really the yoga studio that carried us. So that's a transition, though, that you could expect to see in your marriage, where there's maybe just some shift in who's carrying the weight for a period of time, financially, or changes of some kind that are happening financially within the relationship, as well, different kinds of investments that you're making and so forth. Probably, if you like, in our case, we'll probably be trying to look for a new house and, to live in the next year or so. So the potential of taking out a loan, right? And you have planets in that house that is a substantial loan, like one that you'll be paying off over many years. It's not uncommon to see issues about like loans or debts or taxes and things like that happening when planets enter that house as well. So the focus shifts is the point. I'll do one more for you guys. Let me just move this around a little bit. Here we go. Okay, so this is my, I have a good friend of mine who's a Scorpio rising, so I can talk a little bit about this one just in general. So the energy has been in Capricorn in the third, right? And now you're going to see the energy moving into the fourth. Well, the third is often a house that's very busy. It implies a lot of busyness, of the mind. And it's, I think of the third house like the subway system of New York City or the bus system of New York City. It's kind of that constant movement that you're doing in your neighborhood, or it's like the familiar pathways of mind and space and environment around you that you're always traveling on. In fact, it was associated with the moon in ancient astrology, who was the ruler of messengers, highways, travel, and so forth, and Mercury sometimes too. But the moon was associated with the third house. That was called the joy of the moon. And so this person has been really active and busy and on the go, in a very kind of busy environment, a lot of change, moving around the past couple of years, and learning and studying a lot too. There's been a lot of a focus on learning new things and stuff like that. Now, things are moving into the fourth house. They just bought a house and are planning to start a family, right? And so that's happening as the transition is being made into the fourth. Now, one thing that I want to add to all of this, if you're practicing this, is, again, kind of think of it as a story, right? And then the second layer that I want to emphasize is that when you're telling this story, think to yourself about specifically about Jupiter entering a new house. We know that Saturn is going to bring potential heaviness, hard work, sometimes heavier themes. So when Saturn enters a house, you can think, here's where some of my spiritual work is going to be over the next few years. It's going to reward me if I put the work in. So it's not a bad transit, but it's only going to reward me if I do the work in that area of life that it's kind of calling me to. And then Jupiter changing signs. The nice thing is that you've got a lot of support. It's not just any kind of support that you're getting. If you put the work in here and focus here, it will reward you with abundance. That there's this, when Jupiter enters a new house and sign, it's like there's good luck. There's wind at your back. Special people enter your life, or teachers, or blessings in the form of good networking, and just that kind of energy of like the good spirits are kind of with you. Jupiter is going to offer that as well. So you have this interesting combination to look at: hard work that will pay off, but also some wind behind your sails in that same area of life, which is nice. Now, at the exact same time, remember that Jupiter has been in its fall and is about to pick up dignity. Now, this is a huge thing. When a planet changes signs, it can also change dignities. So when Jupiter, for example, when Mercury, for example, leaves Sagittarius and goes into Capricorn, it's going to be happier. For one, it'll be on the other side of the sun, which means it won't be combust. It'll be starting to recover from combustion with the sun. But then simultaneously, it'll be out of Sagittarius, which is a sign of its detriment or exile. So you always have to pay attention to those dignities, because when it changes signs, if you have Mercury in a house right now and it's combust and it's in its detriment, that's going to mean that there are some challenges in that area. When it changes signs and at least even goes into neutral dignity, meaning it doesn't have any positive dignity, but it doesn't have any negative dignity either, that's going to mean at least that the feeling of difficulty around mercurial stuff is going to lift significantly. That's what we're about to see with Jupiter. Jupiter has been, it's been a year of a lot of hard work, right? Personally, socially, etc. So when Jupiter changes signs, the potential also for Jupiter to bring benefits without complications is there. And the same thing will be true for Mercury. When Mercury moves out of Sagittarius, there will be less compromise. Now, on the other hand, if you look at Mars in this chart, when Mars moves into Taurus, it's going to be out of the sign of its own power, Aries. It moves into Taurus, it's in its exile. So you're going to get a Mars that suddenly becomes a little bit more challenging. Now, when that's activating a whole sign house in your chart, that typically means that some of the more challenging dimensions of that area of life that you're dealing with relative to your natal chart will start to appear. Some planets move faster than others, and generally speaking, the ones that are slower indicate, the things that we kind of feel like we're dealing with for a little bit longer. They feel a little bit more intense, and that's just because they last a little bit longer. So that's that's the Mars, the superior planets that we call them, because they're slower than the sun: Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then of course any of the outer planets. So I hope that this has been helpful for all of you. I want to show you a birth chart in which this exact situation can be seen. So let me just, I'm going to pause this for a second and I'll show you. Okay, so in this chart that I'm going to show you, I want to give you a sense of how this can actually work in terms of natal delineation as well. So what I want you to notice is that in this chart, if we're reading for the topic of marriage, karmically speaking, you can see that the descendant as well as the whole sign 7th house is in Aries, which makes the topical significator of marriage Mars. Now, what you'll notice here is that when this person was born, Mars was in the process of moving into Cancer in the 10th whole sign house. What does this mean? Well, if I'm a reader and I see that Mars is in Gemini, but it's about to move into within 1 degree here, which is typically about the range that I would include, maybe 2 degrees, something like that, if it's really close to changing signs in a natal chart. The planet is not just a static thing that you read in the birth chart. The planet about to ingress into Cancer means that it's about to enter its fall. And in fact, what this could point to would be a devastating event or change of circumstance around the topic of marriage that could indicate the marriage partner or the marriage itself falling on really hard times. And in the 10th house, you would think that that could even indicate something that was more public. And that is indeed what happened in this particular chart. You have a marriage that fell apart with some degree of it was the way in which it fell apart was very sort of tragic, unfortunate, and very public. So that change of dignity, Mars in late Gemini, moving into Cancer, changing houses, the marriage house indicator fell on hard times in a very public place. So you can see this in natal charts too. You can actually read the change of signs or ingress of planets from one sign to another in this way and actually interpret that as a symbolic progression of that karma in the life of the native. And I wouldn't drag planets through signs willy-nilly. It's just those that are about to change signs and usually change dignities as well. So I hope that this has been informative and interesting for you today. Remember that my Kickstarter is running through there's 15 days left to go. We're at 771 backers and we are trying to get to 1,000. That's our stretch goal. I really appreciate your support chipping in. Thank you everybody so far who has chipped in. Really, really appreciate your support. Remember, you can pick up 50% off all my online programs. There's lots of different recordings and readings and stuff like that you can pick up as a reward. If you like this channel, if you share it with other people, there's a staff of 3 people other than myself now that are a part of the production of all of this year round. I can't thank them enough. And it's because of you guys starting last year that I was able to hire help. And this year, thanks to you guys, that'll keep going. So really appreciate it. You're supporting good stuff. And we have a lot of good stuff that we're going to continue to produce and make. If you watch the video on the Kickstarter page, you can learn a little bit more about some of our goals for next year and things like that too. So, all right, that's what I've got for today. I hope you guys have a good one. Take it easy. Bye.